My name is Farah Abdallah Akoum, and I'm a senior manager for product AI at Zillow Group. I'm also the chapter lead for Women in Product Seattle chapter. Welcome to Refine Your Toolkit stage. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors without whom this event could not be possible. During this session, Product Craftsmanship, people part of PMing, we are so honored to welcome three wonderful speakers. Lilla Cosgrove, Iravati, Hingne, and Rupi Sureshkumar. First, let's all welcome Lilla Cosgrove, co-founder and chief information officer at Candid, a direct-to-consumer oral healthcare company currently tackling clear orthodontic aligners. Her past experience focused on the overlap of the digital and the physical worlds at Hello Alfred, where she worked on creating trusted brands through digital touchpoints. In her spare time, she's an urban planner nerd and tries to get out as much as possible in New York City. Lilla Cosgrove will share her expertise with you during our next presentation, Strategies for Managing Difficult Stakeholders. Please join me in welcoming Lilla to our stage.
How many of you have had a stakeholder at work who you've found really difficult to work with? I imagine the answer is pretty much everyone. On the other side of the coin, how many of you have been a difficult stakeholder at work? Even though I may not want to admit it, I am sure that I have. To briefly introduce myself, I'm Lilla. I'm a co-founder and the chief information officer at a company called Candid, where I run engineering, product, and the data and research teams. Candid is a direct-to-consumer healthcare company that offers clear orthodontic aligners. It's commonly known as Invisalign, with the right combination of expertise and convenience in both an at-home and in-store brick-and-mortar retail experience at a much more accessible price point than the existing products on the market. What we're going to focus on today, however, is not healthcare specific. It's a very industry agnostic problem of dealing with difficult stakeholders at work. Okay, so we all start new jobs at big companies or small companies with a ton of energy for what we're planning to work on, but actually relatively little context about who we're going to be working with. So we settle in, we start doing some projects, and something that somebody does starts rubbing us the wrong way. We might start by thinking, you know what, it's okay, let's just push through it. But then it happens again, starts to eat at us a little bit. So enter our difficult stakeholder. In some ways, our difficult stakeholder is super easy to identify, right? There they are, the one doing the annoying thing. But we're going to go quickly deeper here by really identifying the why behind why somebody is what you perceive to be difficult. So in a past role, I had a designer who I worked with who I actually really liked as a person, but really struggled to work with as a designer. And one of the things that we were working on was an internal tool that was mostly being used by mobile devices in the field. And we were disagreeing about a bunch of super fundamental truths, like it was a web app. And so was this going to have to work without Wi-Fi or in a low service environment? And so this is a huge problem because I'm the PM and I know that our back and forth is costing us momentum and feature delivery on a daily basis. But I'm there, going to work every day, just trying to figure out what to do. There's a famous psychologist whose name is Marshall Rosenberg. This is him. And he's pioneered a bunch of work that we'll talk about. And one of the things that he says is that fundamentally, people only say two things, please and thank you. And by that, he means that, that's obviously an oversimplification, but everything that we say or do is either motivated by a please, my needs are not being met, or by a thank you, my needs are being met. So somebody is what you perceive to be a difficult stakeholder because they have an unmet need of some sort and are struggling to communicate about it. In fact, they might be struggling to identify it, but really, they're there saying please. An unmet need is fundamentally human, right? We have needs around acceptance and belonging and fun and a ton of things. And we bring our whole human selves to work, and that's super important when thinking through or dealing with any interpersonal conflict. It can manifest, however, in lots of different ways, and often that's based on somebody's communication style. So there are 4 basic communication styles: passive, aggressive, passive-aggressive, and assertive. The passive communication style is stylistically somebody who avoids expressing their feelings and opinions. They're often quiet. We've experienced this before. And the consequences for them is that they often carry a lot of shame. They can carry resentment. They can be prone to outbursts because, they're holding so much inside. The aggressive communication style, this person clearly expresses their feelings and their opinions, but they do so in a way that can often violate the rights of others. They're always trying to dominate a conversation, which can lead to verbal abuse. It can lead to personal alienation. Typically, it's not good for them or the person receiving that communication style. Passive-aggressive is actually a term that was coined by Marshall Rosenberg, but has obviously entered into our common lexicon, and is somebody that appears passive but ends up acting out their anger in other different subtle ways, right? They might make a snide comment after the meeting. And for them, this can often lead to alienation. It can also lead to inauthenticity. Authenticity, as we define it, is power, freedom, and self-expression. And so they're not able to freely express their needs, what they're looking for, their true whole self in their conversations. And then assertive. So assertive is obviously the style that we all hope to achieve. It's a style in which you're clearly stating your opinions and feelings and advocating for yourself while also honoring and respecting the rights of others. And typically this allows assertive communicators to preserve personal connection while still achieving what they need. So as a reminder, this is not the way that someone always communicates, right? We all, and in many cases, are able to achieve an effective, assertive communication style, but often when someone is under threat, they'll gravitate towards one of these types of communication, and sometimes a range of these different types of communication based on the situation at hand. So far we've talked a lot about identification, and you might be sitting there thinking, but Lilla, this is hard. And I was there sitting next to my product designer and thinking, you know what, just plan for offline features. It's really obvious, also because I said so. And I was getting frustrated and finding it very hard. So the first and admittedly the hardest step here is orienting towards empathy. Very few people at work and sit around at work and try to be a jerk, right? People aren't trying to be difficult, typically. But we're also motivated by our ego. We tend to want to win and make others lose. We tend to want to feel big and make others feel small. So in these situations where we're struggling with someone else, we need to look deep within ourselves and search for the ambition that we have to serve the other person. If we think about qualities of leaders that we've loved working for, very often people, and for me specifically, people will tell me, but also for me, it's a leader who I have felt has cared about me as a human being. They've cared about my personal progression. They've cared about what I want to learn. They've cared about where I want my career to go. They've cared about what I'm doing on the weekend and what's bothering me in my personal life. They've cared about me. And that's the same thing here, right? With an orientation towards empathy, we can think through the tools that we have to help someone out of a moment of ineffective communication. So back to Marshall Rosenberg for just a second. He has a framework that we can use for thinking through how to communicate better called nonviolent communication. And there are two pieces of it. One piece is authentic expression, and the other piece is empathetic presence. And the framework for authentic expression, which we're going to focus on first, breaks down with these 4 steps. So stating an observation, expressing a feeling, identifying a need, stating a request. So let's go back briefly to my offline tools example. When I hear you say that you don't want to consider offline tools, I feel frustrated and confused feeling because I need to see progress toward a solution. Next time, when you disagree, could you give me more specificity about where you're coming from? Request. So the key things here, an observation. Observation needs to be accurate and detailed and free from personal evaluation. So really often, quickly, we will jump towards an observation that actually has a layer on top of it that is an interpretation of what we thought happened in that situation. And it's really important that an observation is purely the observation. What did the person say? What did the person do? But not any layer on how did I experience that. Feelings direct us towards our needs, but they are distinct from our thoughts. Identifying feelings, though it seems easy, can be hard. If you need to say I feel like, it's probably not a feeling. And additionally, when it has too many layers of sort of self-serving on it, it isn't probably the core of that feeling. So I feel betrayed, probably not a feeling, that's an accusation, right? Needs, we all have needs. They come from a whole range of experiences in our lives. They're universal energies, and importantly, they're distinct from strategies. A need could be, I have a need for friendship. I have a need for belonging. I have a need for acceptance. I have a need for joy. And they're distinct from the strategies. They're not the fix themselves. They're just identifying the thing that I'm looking for. And then the request is the realistic strategy that can help meet those needs. And the important thing is that for requests, we also as the listener, need to be willing to hear no. So you can make a request, someone can say no, then you can always revert back to the nonviolent communication basics and try to, reconsider with them. Alternatively, you can also do this with questions sometimes. So when you say you don't want to consider offline tools, do you feel sidelined because you need to feel that you were included in the process of gathering information? And the interesting thing is that even the misidentification of somebody else's feeling will start the conversation. They'll say, no, I don't feel sidelined. I feel angry because X, Y, Z. And then you'll have a place to start. So authentic expression, part number 1. Part number 2, empathetic presence. We've talked a bunch about empathy, and we all have our own strategies for how to center in our empathetic self. For me, that can be pausing, taking a deep breath, making sure that I've done the upfront thinking that I am sufficiently connected to my own needs in order to be present for that other person. Beginning with an intention to connect, being responsive to the other person. Often, as we work through things with other people, though, we'll find that sometimes it actually requires many layers of digging to get down to the actual truth. So I might have said to my product designer, I feel like you're not trying to help. Again, that I feel like statement, that's actually not a feeling, that's an accusation. I feel like you don't care, not a feeling. That's not my feeling, that's something that I'm impressing upon to him. So the basis of this format, observation, feeling, need, request, is always a place that you can start, but sometimes it needs a little bit of prep. It needs a little bit of pre-thinking in order to get down to sort of what is this core. And that's why I really like that framework, because it's a mechanism to sort of prep yourself or think through that up front. Sometimes, obviously, you also want to be able to do this in a different and more subtle way. And so now we're going to move out of the theory and dive into some of the tactics. But everything we've already talked about is really the base for all of the structures that we have to move these conversations forward. Okay, so our passive communicators. I find that with passive communicators, and I'm sure all of you have used these tactics, a structured listening session is really a great place to start. So actively listening to that person, making them feel heard and appreciated. And generally I find that PMs can be really good at this because it's a similar mindset to what we bring to user testing sessions. It doesn't have to be formal. In fact, sometimes the other person doesn't even have to know. It could be during like a regular one-on-one, but it's really about that active listening. Kim Scott gives a really great example of this in her book, Radical Candor. She talks about a Japanese team at Google who was really frustrated with how the US team was approaching ads in mobile app. And she set up this session in which she was really pulling ideas from them, and then was able to, when she understood their perspective, really push them to then be what she coined as politely persistent. And sometimes you have to specifically incentivize people. So on our team at Candid, we have a little stuffed whale whose name is Faily, the fail whale, who is given to somebody who volunteers to share something that during that sprint they actively messed up. And this person might not be a passive communicator generally, but for this type of example, when they're sharing something vulnerable that they feel uncomfortable with, they are. And so we try to create this structure in which they can feel safe to express that thing and share with the team for learnings. Okay, passive aggressive communicators. This one is a tough one. What I found to be helpful is upfront expectation management on how a project is going to run, often via a RACI framework. So RACI, for those who haven't used it, stands for, is RACI, it's an acronym, stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. The responsible person is responsible for corralling all of the stakeholders and making sure that a decision gets made, but they're not doing all of the work themselves. The accountable person has the authority to approve or veto decisions. The consulted people are where the meat really happens. They're knowledge, experts from across the business, whose job is to really help execute and will actively be involved in the sessions that influence those decisions. And then the informed are just people that need to be kept in the loop on progress, but not looped into the details. And what helps for a passive aggressive communicator is to clearly establish upfront how things are going to work, which allows them to feel comfortable in their role where they fit into the whole pie, and also allows you to clearly address their concerns as you come through the project, because they might still act passive aggressively at some point, but you have already clearly set expectations around how things are going to work, and then you can revert back to your nonviolent communication basics to address things as things come up. All right, finally, we have our aggressive communicators. So tailored pre-reads or tailored read-ins of big ideas or projects can be helpful for aggressive communicators because it can make them feel really in the loop and appreciated. So this can be a one-on-one in which you talk it through, or an actual pre-read in which you send them something and ask for their advice. At Candid, we have a really specific product requirements document template, and so often I will start with that as a place to actively collaborate with someone and then use it as the basis for a conversation. Recently, we were working on our internal tools systems for our Candid orthodontists, and one of our orthos was struggling to see the vision, as I'd just been explaining it to him in words. And so we wrote out that PRD. We actually ended up doing mock-ups of a handful of the screens as well to illustrate our conceptual ideas, and then we walked him through it. We heard his ideas and we really made the tweaks where we needed to. And then when we brought it to the broader group, he was able to be an insider. He actually ended up jumping in and supporting a number of our ideas instead of rejecting them. So I don't have a perfect redemption story to wrap up the story with my designer. It wasn't that always and forevermore we communicated perfectly. We also had steps forward and steps back. And the theme here is that none of these are perfectly plug and play, and that what it really hinges from is doing the hard work of identifying moments in yourself and in others where needs aren't being met. But if you can effectively do that work, you can achieve a world and a future in which you never have a difficult stakeholder relationship again.
Thank you, Lilla. Next up, please welcome Iravati Hingne, Head of Product at Yahoo Small Business, Verizon. Prior to Verizon, she was responsible for building customer centric features for e commerce at Gap Inc. Iravati will share her expertise with us today and also the one of her daughter. Lessons from my daughter.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to take you back in time. This day, 3 years ago, my husband Gopi and I were on a beach excitedly talking about our future. I was 6 months pregnant and looking forward to a brand new chapter in my life. 3 months later, our beautiful baby daughter Maya entered this world. And from then on, we experienced a roller coaster of a ride that we were completely unprepared for. We tried to settle in our new life as a family of three, but with every passing month, we discovered new health issues for Maya. We had more doctor visits than visits to the park. We spent hours on Google researching medical topics that we had no idea about. Finally, this year, after Maya turned 2, we got her diagnosis. Maya suffers from a rare gene disorder, and she's the only one in this entire world that has been diagnosed so far. The doctors tell us that Maya will be severely mentally and physically disabled for the rest of her life. It was devastating to hear this. Navigating this chaos and uncertainty was tough. I had to take everything that I had in my toolkit and develop new coping mechanisms. Over these past 2.5 years, I slowly built my resilience muscle. Raising Maya has been a journey of acceptance, empathy, and self care. Today, I would like to share the lessons from this personal journey that helped me become a better product leader. Lesson number one: accept the reality and look ahead. Now, this was tough. When doctors told us about Maya's diagnosis, I kept thinking, how could this happen to my child? It took me a while to accept the reality, but when I did, I was able to think about next steps for Maya much more clearly. As a product manager, there have been times when my team and I gave our 200% to build a product, but then it didn't work for customers. I have struggled to come to terms with it and thought, how could this happen to my product? The lesson for me here was I cannot control the outcome, but I can control my actions. This is the time when the team and my product need me, and the sooner I accept the reality, the easier it gets to take action. Lesson number two: make customer empathy a part of your team's DNA. Raising Maya has taught me empathy. Now, Maya does not walk or talk and she cannot express herself. So, we as parents need to infer what is it that she wants, what is it that she needs. And every minute of the day, we need to be in tune with her and take her perspective. She also has a team of caregivers, doctors, and therapists working on her. So, we need to represent Maya and constantly advocate for her. And this has become a part of our DNA. Switching to work, my team builds digital solutions for small businesses. Sometimes we would get so buried under deadlines and revenue targets that we started losing touch with the human being that we were building for. This user empathy that we had developed during the research phase was not carrying through to the product development phase. As a result, we were building for the functional needs of the customer, but we were missing out on addressing their emotional needs. I told my team of product managers, let's start immersing the extended team in the story of the customer. How did they start their business? What keeps them awake at night? We started involving them on customer support calls. We started taking them for customer visits so that they could see firsthand how a customer is running their business. This enabled them to get into a customer's mindset much more authentically. Designers started designing not just for function, but also for emotion. Engineers started building product not for the product manager, but for the customer. When all of us were debating about a product feature, instead of saying that I think we should build X, we all started advocating for what the customer would want. This constant focus on customer empathy helped us build moments of delight in our product. This received a tremendously positive response from customers, and our product was recognized by Gartner. Lesson number 3, don't forget your team. They need empathy too. So, as I took on leadership roles, I used to find that conversations with certain types of people were harder than others. It was a combination of my personality and the other person's personality that would lead to that conflict. When we used to have meetings, I would skirt around the core issue of the conflict and still try to advance the meeting agenda, but that would invariably lead in deadlock. Developing empathy enabled me to see where the other person is coming from, and I opened up to the idea of talking about this discomfort. Listening to the other person's point of view and having a dialogue about it helped us slowly resolve this underlying tension, and we began to have productive meetings. Lesson number 4, drive your career growth. Now, navigating the healthcare system for Maya has taught us to be precise, direct, and ask for what we want, be it an MRI or certain medication or therapy. At work, when I wanted to take on more responsibility, I used to have this approach of going to my leadership and saying that I want to do more. And then I would sit back and wait for them to hand me this shiny new project. That didn't take me very far. But when I started seeing things from their perspective, I realized that they had a lot on their plate already. And my vague ask was adding one more thing to that list. That's when I started to go to them with specific asks. For example, I would say, in today's team meeting, you mentioned that you need to put together this presentation. So I would like to contribute to the product strategy section of that presentation. This specific ask made it much easier for them to give an opportunity that would end up in a win win situation for us both. Lesson number 5, invest in self. Okay, so for this last lesson, you're going to think I'm a nerd, and I'll admit I am one. I was writing a to-do list for everything that I needed to do at work, with Maya, with my home. And as I stared at it, I realized that I needed to do a lot of things. I wanted to do this other set of things, but I had only so much time and energy. It sounded like a classic product management situation. This was a new chapter in my life with a whole new narrative. And in order for me to show up effectively at work, with Maya, with my husband, I first needed to focus on myself and essentially build Iravati version 2.0. I thought to myself, can I product manage my life just as intentionally as I product manage my products? So that's when I turned to my product management skills and tried to apply them to my personal life. So I laid out my vision and defined OKRs for myself. For each of the objectives, I defined clear metrics. So, for example, for my relationships objective, a metric was go on a date once a month with my husband. I also assigned two overall metrics, my happiness index and my stress index, to see how I was doing. And then I got into this weekly rhythm of doing a retrospective for my past week and prioritizing my upcoming week. This enabled me to have a laser focus on doing only those things that mattered and cutting out the busy work. I'm now able to create some calm in the chaos and slowly find ways where instead of just surviving, I can see myself slowly thriving. Full disclaimer, I am nowhere close to getting it all right. But being a mother to Maya has taught me to be more resilient, more empathetic, and celebrate the small wins along the way. And tapping into these life lessons has made me a better product leader. Thank you to the Women in Product Conference for giving me a platform to share my story. And thank you to all you fantastic women product leaders for listening.
Thank you, Iravati. Next up, we are pleased to welcome Rupi Sureshkumar, product manager at Facebook London, where she spends her days scaling and improving the company's fake account detection systems. Prior to Facebook, she was a PM at Microsoft, and having studied computer science and cognitive science, she is applying behavioral psychology to her daily PM job. Rupi will share with us how to do more deep work and become a better PM.
Hi everyone, my name is Rupi Sureshkumar and I'm a product manager at Facebook, and I'm really excited to be here to talk to you all about deep work. And I want you all to leave this talk convinced that if you can find more time to integrate deep, focused work into your schedule, whether you're a PM or you're any other role, then you can be more productive, you can be happier, and you can perform better, and you'll see the results in your product as well. So let's start with a small story. So I want to go back a few years when I was a few years into my career as a product manager, and I was kind of having a low point, as many of us might do. I didn't feel like I was accomplishing at the level that I could. That started to affect my confidence and thereby my happiness. And I started to question whether I should be a PM at all. But I was encouraged that I should start small and take a look at my schedule. Take a look at my schedule and see if there were parts of my day that I enjoyed the most and parts that I enjoyed less. So I went ahead and I looked at my schedule. What I noticed was a pattern. On the days where I had back to back meetings and I didn't feel like I had the time to get on tasks that I knew I needed to do, I ended the day feeling quite stressed. And then there was that rare day where I found some time to get into the data or to prepare a strategy document where I just felt really good about the work I was doing and felt like I was enjoying my work more. And this is when I learned about the idea of flow. And flow is a brain state that we can get into when we're just, if you think about those times when you're just so engrossed in the work that you're doing, you lose track of time, you're extremely productive. And so what I did was I made a few tweaks in my schedule and I opened up more time for me to be able to do this so-called deep work and get into flow. And what I realized was that I was way more productive. I was getting a lot more done. That made me way more confident. And therefore, I wanted to share these tips with you all and the women in product community. And I especially think that during working from home, our schedules are shifted. It's a really good opportunity to rethink how we're spending our time and making the most effective use of our time. And so let's jump into it. What are we going to be talking about today? Well, two things. The first thing I want to talk about is define deep work and then tell you a little bit why I'm such an advocate for doing more deep work. And the second thing, then, we'll get into some actual tactical tips that you can start taking back today to integrate into how you are working. And so you're probably asking yourself, why does she keep talking about deep work? What does she even mean? So let's get into that. Deep work is a term that was coined by Cal Newport, the author of the book, Deep Work. He says that deep work is professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. So sounds pretty cool and sounds pretty effective. And now I know what you're thinking. If there's something called deep work, then there must be something called shallow work. And you're very right. So how does he define shallow work? He says shallow work would be non-cognitively demanding, logistical style tasks, often performed while distracted. These efforts tend to not create much new value in the world and are easy to replicate. So how might this apply to PMs? Well, the way I think about it, shallow work for PMs is honestly completely necessary, but is things like setting up meetings, following up from meetings, sending out notes, replying to emails, replying to chats, maybe managing a task backlog, the type of work that we can do when we're a bit distracted or maybe even multitasking. Deep work, on the other hand, might look a bit different. Deep work might be around product strategy. So actually defining the strategy, thinking about the market, thinking about your users, getting into data, and deciding what are we going to do next? Are we pivoting? What's the future of this product? Or it might just be taking the time to actually get into the user's feet, taking a few hours to log in as your user, use the product, find bugs, find ways to improve the product. Deep work might also look like some work that you're doing towards collaboration and alignment. So how are you clarifying your vision in different ways such that you can bring different sets of stakeholders on board? How are you thinking about how your team is working and how effective they are? Are they happy? Are they motivated? Do they understand kind of the future for the product? And how are you preparing for meetings? So I know we said meetings were shallow work, but I think preparing for meetings is more like deep work because we all know a good from a bad meeting. And usually a good meeting takes a lot of preparation. It's thinking deeply about what do I want to achieve? It's maybe creating a document and a pre-read to help guide attendees on what you'd like to get done. And so preparing for meetings can really go a long way. Just to summarize, shallow work for PMs could be things like scheduling meetings, sending out notes, replying to emails, writing mundane status updates, task backlogs, any of the type of work that you feel like you can do quite easily or multitasking. And deep work is the work that really needs your full attention to do well, defining your strategy, getting into the user's feet, or clarifying your vision with stakeholders, thinking deeply about how people work together, and preparing for meetings. So maybe you're wondering, does this mean we can just stop responding to emails and focus only on deep work? And the answer is no. Obviously, communication, a lot of this quote, shallow work is really important to how we keep people informed and move things along. But I think the idea is maybe you can do less of it. And so if you're right now doing majority shallow work, are there small changes that you can make and tweaks to your schedule so that you're freeing up more time so that the majority of your time is actually spent doing deep work? And just to reinforce the point, I want to get into why I think deep work is so important. And so I want to talk about 4 reasons why deep work is important. And the first one is that it's rare. And why is it so rare? Well, this is why it's rare. It's these notifications. We, in the modern day, we're in a situation where we're getting emails, pings, and all these notifications that are designed to draw our attention. And so it's super rare to be able to actually cultivate focus. And maybe you're like me, you work in an open office environment. Open office environments are really great for collaboration and really terrible for focus. So you're truly at an advantage if you are someone who can just undistract yourself and really hunker down and focus. The second reason why deep work is so important is that it's valuable. So just taking a step back from PM and thinking maybe about artists or musicians and how they made their great contributions. I don't think Beethoven wrote one of his symphonies in the 30 minutes between meetings. It's that time that you set aside to really get into the zone is when you're able to really have creative and innovative insights. And I think many of us know this, but it's still really tempting to do a lot of the, like I said, shallow work. So inbox zero, for example, is a really great feeling. Some days I just like to go through my emails one by one, tick them off, and I get that immediate reward for my time. And while deep work actually is more valuable in the long run, we don't always get that immediate satisfaction. And so it can be harder to train ourselves to spend time to work on that. The third reason why deep work is so important is that it can really increase your happiness and your satisfaction at work. Maybe you can think about a time when you just got really engrossed into a task and you just lost track of time and you just really enjoyed your day and felt like you were really stretching yourself. Well, this goes back to that idea of flow. And I really like this quote from the book about flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who was the psychologist that coined flow. And he says, contrary to what we usually believe, moments like these, the best moments in our lives, are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. And I really like this quote because it really brings in the point that the most rewarding moments for us in life and in work are the ones where we're really stretching ourselves and doing something like difficult that takes some time. And the last reason why deep work is so important is that it can really improve your work-life balance. And I say this in the context of working from home. For me personally, working from home has created an environment where there's not a clear line between my office and my home, and therefore not a clear line between my day and my evening. And it's really easy for me to sort of do tasks at a suboptimal pace and just let my day go on for too long. So something I've done is actually set aside time in the morning to get through those hard tasks and do that deep work. And if I set aside that time in the morning, that leaves the rest of my day to be doing checking in with folks, going to stand up, etc. And then hopefully ending my day at a normal time so that I can actually maintain work-life balance and reset for the next day. So just to recap, deep work is important for 4 reasons. 1, because it's rare, it's hard to do, which therefore makes folks who can do it really at an advantage. It's valuable, it's correlated with the times when we're making like deep insights and creative insights. 3, it can increase your happiness. Deep work is when you're getting into flow, and flow has been psychologically proven to be a state that is really rewarding for us, that we really enjoy. And the last one is that it can improve your work-life balance because you'll be more productive overall and give you more time outside of work. So now that we've covered why deep work is so important, we can get into the most exciting part, which is actual tactical tips for how you can go and do more deep work. So let's get started with some tips about how to get to do more deep work and get into flow. The first set of tips are around finding time to do deep work. The first tip is to evaluate your current calendar. So take a look at your calendar. Are there any meetings that could be cut down? Hour-long meetings that could be 30 minutes, 30-minute meetings that could be 15-minute check-ins? Are your meetings set up in a way that are kind of like meeting, break, meeting, break, meeting? Well, can you reshuffle that around so that all your breaks are together and now you're actually having a decent amount of time to do some focused work? And look for meetings where maybe you're not needed. Don't feel afraid to say no or push back and ask what the agenda is for a specific meeting. People are vying for your time, and your time is also a valuable time that you can use to be doing deep work. So look for opportunities to get meetings off of your plate. The second thing is to actually then schedule deep work. So now that you've maybe found some areas where you could actually set aside some focus blocks, go ahead and schedule them for all the weeks coming. This is a commitment to yourself that you are going to be committing to deep work, and it's a commitment to others. You can, so that they won't schedule over your time where you want to spend to do deep work. And you can also share this with your team as a really best practice. For example, on my team, we all have set aside Wednesdays for no meetings when we can all do deep work, as well as Friday mornings. And I think this is a great way to all be in sync, as well as all find that time to get focused work done, because it's important for all roles, honestly. Another interesting thing that you can do with your team is to do deep work together. So this is something that my team and I have been doing a bit more of even during working from home. If you think about normal execution, you have maybe the PM is scoping the work, and then data science reviews it, there's some feedback, then data science is setting up the measurement plan, and engineering is executing, and then they have a question, and you can see this just goes on and on as we're kind of going back and forth between different parts of the team. But what we've been doing is using focus blocks together, which in practice just looks like us all getting on a video conference call together, kind of recreating the atmosphere of being in the office. And now we can go and do these things concurrently, and we can easily ask each other questions there. And as a result, we're usually getting through the work in a much shorter set of time. The last tip here is that worst case, if you didn't really schedule it, you can just force deep work. So this is an interesting tip. This is also sometimes called the Roosevelt method because it's something that supposedly Teddy Roosevelt used to do a lot, and it's to force deep work. So it goes like this. Maybe you find an important task that you need to do. So let's say that you need to get a report out, and estimate how long it would take you to do this task. So maybe the report usually takes you about 6 hours to do in total. Now publicly commit to do this task in 50% of the time. So you let your manager, whoever it is, let them know that you'll get it to them in 3 hours, and then go. And you'll end up being in just an insane concentration mode because you will have really pushed yourself to get this done on time. And I don't recommend you do this often because you'll probably miss a few deadlines or burn yourself out. But it can be a really fun way to just force yourself to get into a focused state. Now, the next set of tips are all about preparing for deep work. So now that you've scheduled your deep work, how are you going to prepare for it ahead of time to make the best use of that time? And the first one, pretty straightforward, don't be hungry. You don't want to have set aside all this focused time only to get hungry in the middle and get up for a snack. And then while you're getting that snack, you're checking your email, and before you know it, you're a bit distracted. So prepare, get the snacks and water, whatever it is that you may need, so that you can really be focused on the task at hand. And another tip here is to set intentions. If you're not really sure how you're going to use your time, you might just spend the time kind of catching up on random tasks. But it's a lot better if you can go into the focus block that you've set aside with a clear idea of what you want to do and what success looks like at the end of the focus block. So maybe you want to draft a first version of your team's roadmap. Well, then at the end, you'll have a first version ready and something that you can share with the teammate to start getting their feedback. The last set of tips are all around making the most of the time. So the first thing is to mute distractions. The world's not going to end in a few hours, and even if there's a huge emergency, there's other folks who are going to cover for you. So go ahead, turn your phone off, turn off email notifications. Ideally, don't even use the internet for the entire focus block. It's just going to be really easy to get distracted. So maybe if you know that you're going to need a certain Google Doc or document that you're need to refer to, then go ahead and download it offline before your focus block so that you can really spend your time offline and thinking and not getting distracted. And another tip that's really interesting is if you must keep notifications on, then try to invest in the first reply. So this tip from the book Deep Work is all about how do you invest in your first reply so that you're not having a long back and forth with someone. When someone usually pings us, maybe they ping us and say, hey, can you meet this week? We just really quickly want to get that ping off of us and say, yeah, sure, I can. But then, it'll be a long back and forth between you and that person to do scheduling and figuring out when you can meet. And if you spend some more time on that first reply saying, yes, I can meet, these are the days I can meet, A, B, and C. If any of these work for you, please go ahead and schedule the time. Then you're much more likely to close that conversation then and there and be able to go back to the task you were working on. So just to recap everything that we talked about today. First, we talked about why deep work is important, and it's because 1, it's rare, 2, it's really valuable, 3, it can make you happier, and 4, it can improve your work-life balance. And then just now we talked about some actual tips to do more deep work. The first set of tips was around scheduling deep work. So evaluate your current calendar for opportunities, move things around, go ahead and actually schedule focus blocks into your calendar, and maybe do the same for your team. Find opportunities to focus as a team together, and you can be really productive in that way. And lastly, you can always force deep work by committing to deadlines that you probably can't meet. The second set of tips was around prepping for deep work, whether something small like don't be hungry, or just generally having clear intentions for what you'd like to do in the time you've set aside for focus. And the last set of tips was around making the most of the time. So go ahead, mute notifications, don't get distracted. And if you must have notifications on, then try to invest in the first reply so that you're quickly squaring away any pings or anything coming from others. There's 2 books that I had mentioned in this presentation. For further reading, you can look into Deep Work by Cal Newport or Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I highly, highly recommend both of these. I learned a lot, and a lot of the tips that I shared today are directly from the book and ones that have just especially worked for me. And so that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you ended with some good tips that you can take back and start to incorporate immediately, and I really look forward to connecting with you all.
Thank you, Lilla, Iravati, and Rupi, and to all those who have joined us live. If you would like to connect with the speakers, they are available for Q&A and roundtable discussions in our interactive sessions tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific. You can find the sessions on the side navigation of the hopping window. Coming tomorrow on the stage, join us for everyday product management. Now, even if we are online, there are multiple ways where we can continue the networking during this conference. Reach out directly or meet someone new in our networking mixture under sessions, where you will be paired with a fellow PM. Or you can log on to the hashtag 20 web app to review presentation, decks, and replay any talks you've missed. And if you're inspired by something you shared in this session, head to the attendee sections in the app where you can search by name and connect beyond the event. You can even request a virtual coffee date for next week in the app. Thank you again for joining us, and be sure to join us for our next session on the stage, Everyday Product Management.